the life, but mostly the works, of Michael J. Buckley.
Michael Buckley received his Bachelor's in Arts degree as well as his Master's in Arts degree in philosophy from Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington. Then he received his Master's of Sacred Theology degree from Santa Clara University. Finally, he received his PhD from the University of Chicago. Michael Buckley was a member of the Pontifical Faculty of Theology at the Jesuit School of Theology at Buckley University in California. Then he worked at Boston College for 14 years as the director of the Jesuit Institutes in the Cassius Program of Theology. Now, Michael Buckley is a professor of theology at Santa Clara University. Buckley is currently taking part in many activities today. He is a consultant board member for the Crossroad Herder Publishing Company, the president of the Catholic Theological Society of America, the chair for the Jesuit International Theological Commission, the executive director for the Committees on Doctrine and Pastoral Research and Practices, and finally the president of the Catholic Theological Society of America. So far, Buckley has published 5 books: Motion and Motion's God, Thematic Variations in Aristotle, Cicero, Newton, and Hegel, At the Origins of Modern Atheism, Papal Primacy and the Episcopate, Towards a Relational Understanding, The University as Promise and Project, and finally, Denying and Disclosing God, The Ambiguous Progress in Modern Atheism. At the Origins of Modern Atheism is when Buckley first took his part in the debate over atheism. Buckley describes the rise of modern atheism, atheistic thinkers like Lessius, Mersenne, Descartes, and Newton, and when Catholics began to call upon philosophy and science for reasoning rather than religion. In Papal Primacy and the Episcopate, Towards a Relational Understanding, Michael Buckley argues that a true theology of papal primacy, as opposed to an ideology of primacy, must focus on the papacy's nature as a unique relationship, whose purpose is the unity of bishops among themselves, and, through them, the unity of the entire Church. Denying and Disclosing God, the Ambiguous Process in Modern Atheism, was a follow-up to his book, At the Origins of Modern Atheism. Buckley has received the John Courtney Award, which is the highest award of excellence in theology from the Catholic Theological Society of America. Michael Buckley was hailed as, quote, a colleague whose power of mind brings insight and elegance to our communities of learning, and whose power of heart reminds us of our calling and the persistent courage that it requires, unquote, by the Catholic Theological Society of America.
The earliest work we will examine is Buckley's At the Origins of Modern Atheism. His thesis in his book is that modern atheism first came when Christians tried to embrace philosophy and science as the grounds in which faith should be justified. Buckley says the main people responsible for the rise of modern atheism were not philosophers that are normally thought of, such as Denis Diderot and Henry d'Holbach. It was actually 2 Christians, René Descartes, the founder of a universal mathematics, and Isaac Newton, the founder of a universal mechanics, that led this period. In their attempts to create elaborate arguments for Christianity, they actually did the opposite, in that they became arguments for atheism. They tried to deny the relevance of Jesus and the question of God and God's existence, in which Buckley says only denies itself. For example, Newton looks for an explanation of the predictability and order of the physical world. God is a necessity for the Newtonian universe to work as it should, where absolute time and space are effects of God's existence. Also, that God was the one who made these astronomical bodies and determined distances between planets, suns, and the orbits. His calculations showed that the universe is not self-sustaining, so somehow God must wind the clock of the universe periodically to keep it from getting too out of time. Later, Denis Diderot, who did not start as an atheist, but through his research discovered the idea of disorder. The question arose that, if God is invoked to explain order, what can explain disorder? Diderot was led to matter, a principle able to explain both order and disorder. Baron Paul Henry d'Holbach adds to this, saying that nature explains both physics and morals through the argument of motion. On page 361, Buckley states that the Christian God cannot have a more fundamental witness than Jesus Christ. even antecedent to the commitments of faith. Christian theology cannot abstract from Christology in order to shift the challenge for this foundational warrant onto philosophy. Within the context of Christology and pneumatology, of both communal and personal religious experience, one can locate and give its own philosophical integrity to metaphysics, but Christology and pneumatology are fundamental. If one abrogates this evidence, one abrogates this God. Basically concluding this book is that at the root of modern atheism is theology's betrayal of itself.
We will now be moving on to his most recent work, Denying and Disclosing God. Denying and Disclosing God is an exploration of the internal contradictions of theism as it has developed in the modern era. Its starting point is the conclusion of his earlier work, At the Origin of Modern Atheism, that atheism was generated dialectically from contradictions in theism. In the first chapter, Buckley sets out to demolish the popular conviction that atheism arose out of the antagonism of the new sciences to religion. Buckley discusses the works of Galileo, Kepler, and Newton, and how they had affected atheism. Chapter 2 opens with a clarifying discussion of Buckley's notion of historical dialectics. He does not intend to invoke an inevitable transcendent culmination of history's dialectical process. Instead, he is merely recognizing a meaningful pattern. A particular form of theological argument led to a very similar atheistic response in multiple historical settings. In Chapter 3, Buckley responds to Paul Tillich's accusations that the inferential rational approach to God, and thus, for Buckley, the possibility of atheism, began with Thomas Aquinas. This charge is mistaken because Aquinas argued that primordial knowledge of God is given in our longings. It is this pre-rational knowledge of God that is clarified through rational reflection. Chapter 4 begins by surveying the turn to the subject brought about thinkers like Locke, Kant, and Schleiermacher, who developed philosophical systems in which questions about the limits of human knowledge were foundational. The fifth chapter consists of a comparison between the projection theories of Feuerbach and Freud and the mystical contemplation of St. John of the Cross. Feuerbach argued that because God is not a sense object, ideas about God must come from human consciousness. In the sixth chapter, Buckley presents his solution to the problem of atheism. God's existence cannot be proven through philosophical arguments about the natural world. Instead, God must be known in the immediacy of a religious experience. We will now discuss his work, The Catholic University as a Promise and a Project. Michael Buckley explores such questions as the identity, promise, and academic constituents of Catholic universities in the United States, more specifically Jesuit universities. Buckley uses his own experience of Jesuit universities to illustrate his vision and is able to write with the understanding of a philosopher and a theologian, as well as incorporating the ideas of other academic disciplines as well. Buckley's thesis in this complex book is that the academic and the religious are fundamentally related. Buckley says that the problem with this issue is interpreting how we understand this relationship between church and university. Though church and university are connected, ultimately education remains a secular concern for the university, and Buckley believes this relationship is simply not good enough. Therefore, he instead argues for an intrinsic relationship. He states that Catholic universities need to focus more on this inherent relationship of church and university, and remember that one is incomplete without the other. Buckley believes it is essential that theology should be integrated into all academic aspects of a university, no matter what the subject. Along with this, Buckley also discusses the two signs of contradiction related to Jesuit universities: their commitment to an open and free discussion, and academic pluralism. The final chapter of Buckley's book ends on a thought-provoking note as Buckley reflects his beliefs that Jesuit and Catholic institutions can fulfill their promise.